Hello everyone. Being born in Eastern Europe, I often found myself surrounded by an ocean of simple, square, and often grey apartment buildings. Exactly the same was for all my travels in Eastern Europe or in countries that were part of the former Soviet Union, like Estonia, Latvia. So join me today on the streets of Kyiv and let's explore together this communist architecture and a little bit of history about it. Let's go. The history of communist buildings as we know them today, or Commie Blocks or Panelki as they are also known, starts with the Hrushchevkas, which were built under the leadership of Nikita Khrushchev, who was the leader of the Soviet Union between 1953 and 1964. So let's find ourselves some Hrushchevkas and then let's dive a little bit deeper in some history about them. After the Second World War, the Soviet Union was experiencing a severe housing shortage, caused by mainly two factors. The first factor was the rapid industrialization the Soviet Union was going through at the time. That meant that millions of people had to move from the villages to the cities. Another factor was the severe destruction a lot of the Soviet cities faced during the Second World War. It is estimated that up to 90% of the housing infrastructure in the European side of the Soviet Union was damaged or completely destroyed by the Nazis. Recognizing the need for rapid urban development and housing, Nikita Khrushchev launched an ambitious program in the late 50s to address this issue. The focus was on raising the living standards and providing more amenities for the Soviet population. And this is basically how the Hrushchevkas were born and how the communist architecture as we know it today was born. Now, I think I have some spider on my face. Whatever. Now, as I'm gonna show you in a second, Hrushchevkas were built from prefabricated concrete panels. This was because they had to be quickly assembled in order to address the severe housing shortage, the severe need that the population had at the time. So I'm gonna show you right now. If you pay enough attention, you can see where the cement is, that these are actually big panel blocks put together. Some of these buildings were built as quickly as 3 weeks. The apartments were small, with especially small kitchens and small bathrooms. But the Soviet propaganda machine, ingenious as it was, made this look like an advantage, with advertisements at the time indicating that in this type of apartments you have everything on hand, so there is no need whatsoever to run around the house and get it. Also, in these buildings, in this type of buildings, there was no elevator. Well, you might think, why there was no elevator? It's very simple, and it's very logical, right? You probably thought about it already. It is because the Soviet doctors conducted special researches that were showing a person can live in a house that has up to 5 floors without having their health affected due to the lack of an elevator. Despite their disadvantages like small size, bad sound isolation, low energy efficiency, people were finally able to live in single-family apartment buildings. But in 1969, they ceased to be built, and they were replaced by Brezhnevkas. As you can probably guess, the name comes from the name of Leonid Brezhnev, who was the leader of the Soviet Union between 1964 up until his death in 1982. So let's go and find ourselves some Brezhnevkas, have a look at them, have a look at the neighborhood. So we're here in a neighborhood filled with Brezhnevkas. So a little bit of context. Why did Leonid Brezhnev decide to build new buildings? Well, when he came to power, he stated that his predecessor, Nikita Khrushchev, didn't care enough about the living standards of ordinary citizens. So he proclaimed a new course for the Soviet Union, aimed at raising the living standards of its people. Of course, one of the best ways to lift the living standards of the population is through better housing. So that's exactly what he set out to do. So at first glance, Brezhnevkas are the same, or at least very similar to Khrushchevkas, but they were taller. They were between 9 and 17 floors. The main reason why Brezhnevkas were taller than the Khrushchevkas was that, according to Soviet socialist ideals, people needed to have everything in close proximity. Like, every necessary institution had to be within walking distance. A park, a school, a post office, maybe a hospital. And of course it is easier to do this when you build taller buildings that can accommodate more people than when you just spread out the neighborhood. While building the Brezhnevkas, the main principles of Soviet city planning, like minimalism and cost effectiveness, remained. But there were still some significant differences between the Khrushchevkas and the Brezhnevkas. The first difference was, of course, the presence of an elevator, due to the increased height of the buildings. The second significant difference was the increased size of the rooms. Now the apartments had bigger rooms, bigger bathrooms, bigger kitchens, and even higher ceilings. Another significant difference was the fact that Brezhnevkas came with more variety, having different shapes and different designs, with architects being given more creative freedom. Now, of course, don't expect that these new Brezhnevkas were some Greek or Roman Empire architectural marvels. No, but they were still a step forward compared to the old square, simple boxes. Now, where I am right now, as you can see, they're actually very similar. So not many different shapes and designs here, but they were. It is also important to note that by Brezhnevkas doesn't mean that all the buildings were exactly the same, even quality-wise. So for example, you had the buildings that you just saw built from prefabricated concrete panels, but you also had a superior class of buildings that was usually built from brick. Those buildings, even nowadays, are quite expensive, especially if they're in a good location. Now, despite the improvements, some problems like bad sound isolation and low energy efficiency remained. I believe that nowadays Brezhnevkas and Khrushchevkas are not just architecture. I think panel key buildings or Commie Blocks, or whatever is the name you would like to call them, are a cultural phenomenon that is reflecting, among many other things, the history, the dreams, the hopes of entire generations after the post-war era in the former communist bloc. Online battles are currently ongoing, with people debating if this type of architecture is ugly and depressing, or if it's just a good aesthetic to look at, or if just evokes feelings of nostalgia. My apologies. And I believe it depends on the person. But for me personally, I think there's a little bit of everything. So thank you for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed this small trip back in history, and I'm looking forward to see you again in the next video.